Welcome to this week's episode of the Anika Apple Podcast. In this episode, we are going to talk about love. What is it about the power of love that can help us see and experience differences in the way we connect with one another? Then we're going to talk about community today because this week is our week to delve into our topic of who we are as a whole. And our focus is on avoiding the trap. How do we protect ourselves emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and physically as we go through times of challenge and strain where things are clearly trying to separate us from the truth of how similar we truly are? And then, of course, we'll finish up our episode with the Ask Anika Anything question. And this one is a doozy. I'm going to do my best to keep it short and sweet today, but it really could be its own podcast episode, so we can't wait to get into it. So join us on the show. So what is it about the centering power of love that I think it's important for us to know? I think one thing to start is that love is the center of all things. Love is what binds us together. And what's interesting for me in my experiences through the people that I support, what I see in life, what I know, is that when we operate from a place of love, we can extend love and grace to others despite the circumstances and experiences that we may be having with them. And so one of the things that's really important for us to explore is when it feels difficult for us to love others, to extend love to others, we have to come back to how we are loving ourselves. It's difficult to reflect something to other people that you do not think you're deserving of yourself. In fact, it makes it really complicated to give love from an unconditional place when you're unwilling to receive it and don't think that you are worthy. So in order for us to have an experience that is really what has been designed for us, really what our Creator intended for us, we have to be able to extend love to people even when we disagree with them. It doesn't mean that we have to like what they do or like their choices, but it does mean that despite those things, despite the differences, despite the ways in which, we may show up and have opposing views or perspectives, that we still ground ourselves in the fact that people are still worthy of love. And there are beautiful examples of things, places, situations, circumstances where people have really struggled to extend love, but have found a way. And what's amazing to me is that there's a story of a woman who lost her son at the hands of another young man. He took her son's life. And instead of doing what likely many people would do, she made the choice to say, "You are now my son." And she visits him in jail where he's incarcerated. I don't know for the amount of time, but she has been going regularly to see him. And what she said to him very clearly was, "You took his life and now you have to replace him." And somehow she made the bold, daring, beautiful, and loving choice to find a way to extend love to this young man who made this decision that ended her son's life. And I'm sure there's a ton more complexity behind that. I imagine that going repeatedly and spending time with him is part of the process that she used to heal and to experience forgiveness. But what an incredible example for us. When we experience things with people that are not egregious, they're just differences. It's just friction. It's just something about someone you don't like, and therefore you are unwilling to extend love to them. It makes you think, if she could find a way to have grace and to share love with someone who changed the course of her entire life, maybe we can too. I think a lot about the way that God demonstrates love. I think a lot about that as an example for us. God gives us love unconditionally. It doesn't matter how far we go. It doesn't matter what we do, what choices we make, what decisions we make. Sometimes I know I've been one where God has said, I want you to do X, Y, Z. And I'm like, I'm going to do X, Y, and A. But still, God welcomes me back with open arms. And the more that I deepen my love relationship with God, where I'm open to receive love and forgiveness and grace and all of the things from God, where I know that I'm worthy of it, the easier it is for me to treat others in the same way. It's actually quite simple. It actually takes more work to not extend love and grace to others than it does to give it. Just like it's more work for us to operate from a place of unforgiveness than it is for us to just truly forgive. So I wanted to start this podcast episode because I think there's something really important here for you. There's an opportunity for you to call your attention back to yourself to say, how am I operating from a place of love? And if I'm not extending love to others, and if it's uncomfortable for me to give unconditional love, what does that really say about how I'm loving me? What does it really say about how I think about myself in relationship to other people? Because at our core, we were all created from love and to love, created to love. And we will not heal, we will not grow, we will not see a different experience in this lifetime until we begin to operate from a place of love. There's much more to be explored on this topic. But before we talk about it in relation to anything else, the opportunity for you to do your own self-exploration is here. That introspective work can change your life, and I encourage you to get busy doing it. So today's episode, Beware of the Trap, is really grounded in this segment about community. So when you think about community, I always relate it to, who we are in relationship to each other. So that could be people who work together, people who fellowship together, people who are part of social groups together, people who are part of physical communities and cities together. We are all connected. And that's a beautiful thing. It can be beautiful, but we have to be really aware of what's happening right now. There's a divisiveness that is intending to pull people apart. And if we really get to the core of it, it's being driven by a balance or imbalance of power. It's in relation to who wants to keep an upper hand. It's in relation to the way in which people want to control the assets and things that we have access to. It's in relation to the desire to hold on to the way things have been, to be unwilling to embrace the changes and shifts that happen when we all can come together. And so if you think about who wins, when we make choices that keep us separate, you will find the answer as to why it's happening. When you think about what it would mean for us to come together as community, to really see and love one another, to support each other, to seek understanding from one another, you'll see the world would shift. And listen, it's not like it's a far-fetched thing, like it's impossible to do. It's more than possible and plausible if we come back to the nature of who we are as people, in our truth, in the genuineness of how we were created, we would be that. But the trap is tricky because it has grown in leaps and bounds. What I mean is that there was a time where perhaps there were a few finite things that made us stand out one from another. Maybe it was around integrity. Maybe it was around choices, lifestyle. Now we delineate things at such a tiny level that it's almost impossible to find people that you really agree with. And the definition of agreement is like, you must agree, you must think the same way I do about things. You must see it exactly the same way. Well, if these people don't believe this, then they're not my people. Well, if the people don't believe that, then they must not be like me. Where before we would have some allowances that it was okay to agree to disagree. And this is a trap. This decision that it has to be all or nothing. You must agree with everything that I think. Otherwise, we're not the same. We're not connected. It's not only false, but it's creating a deterioration of society. We actually have some pretty big things ahead of us. They're going to challenge us. They're going to put pressure on whether or not we see ourselves truly as community to one another. There was a divine guidance episode that I shared not that long ago, and I talked about the needs that we will have of our neighbors, like where they may be growing certain things that we need, and we might be growing certain things that they need, and other people might have, perishables or what have you that, we can resource and share together. Those who know how to operate in community, I keep seeing Loma Linda over and over again, but those who know how to operate from a place of community, they will be well. And those who have chosen otherwise, they will struggle. And so, what can we do as community? I think it's time for us to pay attention to the trap. And the trap is the divisiveness that seeks to separate you from your neighbor. And some of that resides inside of us. It's the opinions and perspectives that we have decided to take on. It's a choice to try and separate ourselves because we don't share all of the same beliefs and thoughts. For some, those beliefs and thoughts are grounded in things that you've been taught, even from your childhood. But that doesn't mean it's right. And it doesn't mean that you can't think beyond what it is that you've been told. I hear a lot of people talking about Christian values from a place where they create separation and minimization of people, where there is shame and where there is judgment. I'm really clear in the time that I spend with God that that is not God's design. And as much as I appreciate and love that people come from a place of wanting to do what they believe is right, this is not a time to take it into our own hands. It is a time for us to take it back to God and be clear. When was the last time that you sat with your higher power, the creator, the divine source, whatever it is that you call God, and asked them, what is your expectation of how I operate in relation to the community? What do you desire community to be? What do you expect the relationships to look like? How do you want it to be formed? What do you want us to accomplish together? In what ways should we look at separation? What are the ways you want us to come together? How would you devise the plan for us to come together? Do the work. Because what I'm really clear about is that what God said to me is it's love. And at the end of the day, love is not just the thing that binds us together, but it is the thing that will help us heal. And it's required. We're going to need it. We already do, but we are going to need it even more so. And just think about the impact for a moment on yourself of falling into the trap. The more separate we feel from each other, the more distance, the less we have the sense of belonging. And the more that that is absent, the less secure we feel. Look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? There is work for us to create connections that support our being at our best health. By the way, the things that we learn and that we share with one another, the ways in which we have healed our bodies, take care of ourselves. Look at the information sharing that sits on the internet alone. We're constantly teaching one another how to take care of ourselves, how we did whatever it is that's amazing that we did, so that other people can do it the same. And for many, they've created businesses out of it, right? And businesses put food on the table, and it allows you to sustain your lifestyle. It allows you to live. That connection matters. But it's not only about the gain that can come in commerce. It also is about soul care. When you think about why people join organizations, I'm a member of a sorority, when people join churches, while people are parts of communities, while they are part of prayer circles, while they join companies instead of their being solopreneurs in their own businesses, like because people like connection. Togetherness matters. And it does something for us emotionally. And it impacts us psychologically. So every part of who we are is impacted by who we are connected to. And that also means that part of the trap for us is that when we are connected to people who are sitting in a place of negativity, because that's what they're choosing for themselves, that there's a halo on us if we're choosing positivity. It's very difficult to operate in a place of positivity when you are surrounded by the negative. But people always see the glass half empty, right? It's work, it's draining. And it doesn't mean that you throw those people away, but it does mean that there has to be a shift. You have to be the light. Or in some cases, you might need to make a decision to surround yourself with some other people who can pour light back into your space, refilling you as you refill them. But we cannot think that there's not an impact happening here. The more divisiveness that exists between us, the less connected to our truth, to our soul, to our spirit we are. The more divisiveness, the more distracted. The more we take our eyes off of caring for ourselves physically, the less connected we are to our emotional responses for things because we're looking at how others think we're going to respond. They're watching. Well, what if I do this? What if I say this? What will people think? And that discomfort is not just held in your mind, but it's all throughout your body. Worry creates disease. And when we have this discomfort of wondering who the real adversary is around us, we are bringing stress into the body. And we are creating the conditions for things to go awry. So, what I need us to know in this moment is that we are connected. No one man is an island. The connections between all of us are related to the journey and the path that we will be on to heal. The further away from each other we come in this moment, the more work there will be that we will have to do in order to bring us back together. The more that we allow perspectives and opinions to stand in the way of us remembering that at our core, we are all made the same, we all bleed the same, we have the same systems inside of our body, and we were put here for the same ultimate purpose, the more difficult it will be for us to relate to one another. We already have a ton of work to do. If you think about the political agenda in the US, which is where I live, there's already so much that is dividing. I look at what is happening right now, and I've never seen the political landscape pull us further and further apart in the way that it is right now. It's polarizing, and there is so much at stake. And quite frankly, while we've made it a lot around the candidates who are running, at the end of the day, we all are responsible for the mess. We're all responsible for finding a way through after the election, after the last ballot is counted. We have to figure out how to pick up the pieces. It will never solely sit just on a leader, on a cabinet. It will always impact all of us as community. So what we do, how we choose to see each other, the disconnect, and how often we allow ourselves to fall into the trap of looking at people and thinking they're different from you because they have a different opinion or a different candidate that they're voting for. Those are the same people you are going to need in the next season, or we will never be able to fully realize the dreams that we have for this life. And that is the truth. So as community, we need to begin to see ourselves as connected. And we've got to stop doing this thing where we allow lines that were created to help us make sense of things stand in the way of our seeing the human connection that we have to one another. Religion is the thing that pops up for me quite often, and in this moment is coming forward. And I would just say to you that religion is a way that we practice and honor our beliefs. It's practice, but spirituality is the base. The connection that we have to our greater power, to our Creator, to God. There's so many places in the Bible where it talks about there being one religion, that we are one people, that we are all sheep. And quite honestly, we get in our minds around thinking differently and praying differently and worshiping differently to a point where we isolate one another when we're all called to be one. And for those who are like, well, listen, I grew up in my beliefs and I believe this is the right way, how would you ever invite someone to join something where the starting point is a place of not accepting them? Think about that for a moment. You get a job offer to start at a new company and you arrive there on your first day and they make you feel unwelcome. Are you coming back for day 2? We have to think about this thing so differently. If we start from a place of love, knowing that we are all called, created, loved by the Creator, then we know we can find the things that bind us together. The starting point for that is always going to be love. And if we lead with love, we can loosen the reins on all of the ways that we see differences between one another to first find connection. And what if through connection we begin to honor the things that are different? And I don't mean honor them as take them into your own, but recognize, wow, you're your own individual person with these thoughts and feelings and beliefs. Wow, what might I learn here? I've always taught my children that one of the most important things that they should be willing to do throughout their lifetime is to hear perspectives that are different from theirs. You don't learn as much repeating the same thing back to yourself as you would listening to another person. Sitting in a room with people where everyone believes the same thing, you're going to come up with the same solution. It's why when people are in a meeting room and they're trying to come up with new ideas and they get stuck, they bring in another voice. Who could bring fresh perspective? Just because you hear a perspective or an opinion that's different than yours doesn't mean that you have to take it. But now you have broadened your ability to see and to think. It might trigger something new for you, bring a new idea. It might show you that perhaps even what you knew or thought to be true could be better or different. Maybe there's a more excellent way altogether. But at the end of the day, there's the opportunity for us to connect to one another in a way where we first start from a place of love. And we lead from a place where our Creator expects us to extend the kind of human connection one to another. We're a long ways from living into that today. And focusing on the lines between us, the differences between us, is not going to get us any closer. That's the trap that you need to beware of. And every time you allow yourself to fall into the trap, you are creating more dissonance within your body because it's not who you were made to be at your core, even if that is who you've been your entire life. It still is not who you are in your essence. So that takes us into our last segment of the day, which is Ask Anika Anything. And this question was a really good question. I'm going to read the question for us. It's, how do you stay encouraged during massive times of change? Whew, and as I said in the intro, this is a whole podcast episode in and of itself. It really is, because there's so many things to think about when you're going through massive times of change. Being encouraged is being able to see possibilities and to think about the positive, right? It is to remember that things are changing all of the time. If we first start by shifting our perspective to recognize that yesterday is not today, right? We already experienced change in just 24 hours. We're always experiencing change. One of the big things that I've always done through my experiences with corporate and with my clients is to encourage them to stop having conversation around change as if it is a finite event. When you can embrace that things are always evolving all the time, people can get behind that. It's like, yeah, like I'm growing all the time. I'm always evolving. Well, that means I'm changing. But there's a connotation to the word change that makes it almost all of a sudden gives it this feeling of like, ooh, I don't want to deal with that. Or I don't want this thing to happen. Or it must be bad because it's change. It's not going to be the same. I mean, we assume that sameness is good, but sameness all the time would lead us to death, right? Because if you're not growing, then so one, we start to change our perspective around what changes. It's not an event, it's something that we're always experiencing. Two is the relationship to change. One of the things that I always think of is how can I look at what's changing as something new being brought to me? What might I learn? How might I grow? What things might shift? What new opportunities might unfold? What gift is going to be present for me in change that I could not have otherwise accessed? And even in times where the change is not something I desire, if I can find that glimmer, then I can hold on to something as I'm going through the process of change that I'm now looking forward to. I know that on the other side of this, it's going to be XYZ. Think about someone who's just started a workout regimen, right? The first day you got to get out of bed, you might bound out of bed like, okay, I'm ready to do this or whatever. Day two, maybe you're still good. Day three, you're like, oh, I got a meeting, I have this to do. You start to think of all the reasons why you don't want to go, right? And then maybe day four, but you still go. Maybe day four, it's even harder. What is the journey to start a exercise regimen? It's change, right? And so over time, it may become harder if we don't have things in place to help us celebrate, if we don't have things in place to help us keep our eye locked in on the vision. So when we can remember why we decided to go through this change, why we decided this change was important to us, that is one of the things that can help us stay encouraged. If we have a really clear picture of what we want on the other side and we have some milestones, it will help us to stay encouraged as we go through the journey. The other thing is that the credible picture of what we want at the end might be really, really good and really, really clear. But perhaps if it's a far ways out, we might need some milestones in between. So it may be beneficial for us to set up some intermediate points where we're going to stop and celebrate. Like I will be feeling great when I've done this 5 days in a row. So what happens on the fifth day? What do you do for the sixth day? And maybe it's not take a day off, because that's a lot of times I think what we do. We're like, oh, I'm going to give myself a break. But don't do that. Because if the break feels really good to you and you haven't really created this as a new pattern for yourself, you need like what, 30 days, I think. It's somewhere around the high 20s to 30 days to create a new habit. And so in that case, don't give yourself a break from it, but find another way to celebrate, and something that doesn't diminish the change that you've already decided to make. That shift that you're making is for a purpose. And so keeping the purpose in front of you is really helpful. The other thing to think about from change is how you want to feel going through the change. So when I think about staying engaged, I know for me that I am someone who typically navigates pretty quickly through the change curve if I feel connected to the why. If I don't feel connected to the why, that's a whole nother story. I really have to get myself revved up for it, right? So being a part of the change journey for me is one of the best ways to stay encouraged. So I understand what's changing, and then I think to myself, how can I be a part of this change? How can I shape it in some way? How can I be a part of helping others get more comfortable? Which the more times I ground myself in why I think this might be good, why I might see some new light, the more I can help them explore this. So these are some of the ways, and again, like I said, this could be a whole episode, and so I won't take that much more time, but I want to say to you that it's a great question, and I chose to speak to this one today because we are in a time of massive and rapid change. we're going to see a lot of change. As a matter of fact, when we are at this time next year, a lot of what we see today is going to look very, very different. And we have a couple of years ahead where we're going to see things transform and transform again. We're going to see a lot of shifts. And so, knowing what I know about change, I would just tell you that where you wrestle with change, it would be good for you to begin to think about the ways that you might embrace change. It would be good for you to consider your relationship with change. What is it about change that you don't like? Was there something that happened perhaps years ago, a narrative that you're holding around change that could be good to change, to shift it, to change even that, to help you embrace it? If you go back to 2020 and you think about the journey that we've been on over the last several years, I shared this in the leadership podcast episode as well. There were so many shifts that people were going through and they could not rally through the change. They were just not ready to embrace change. And we should learn from that. Because if we look at it, what we know to be true on the other side of it is it changed regardless. And there was more that we've learned about ourselves through it. And so many things were surprisingly good, right? I think that for many people, the shift to having to be remote changed their mindsets around what was possible for teams, that they could work effectively. People built businesses. There were lots of things that were born of this time of massive change. And so, how could you look at some of the experiences that you've lived through and find the good to embrace that as what is to come? The other thing is that when we experience loss, whether that loss is a person or it is shifts in what we know to be true and what we consider to be our safety, we often have a story to tell ourselves about whether or not we are entitled to grieve. And I would encourage you to really think about the grieving process. What is grieving like for you? How have you experienced it, perhaps even outside of the loss of a person that you care about? But what is it like when you've had to shift jobs or when you've had to change things or when you've had to move, whatever the places are, that there's something that you've held dear to you that you now have to change? You go through a period of grief. And grief can be what you make of it. You can experience grief in different ways based on your perspective around it. If I were you, I would really think about the ways that I can learn to create comfort within myself when I need to go through the grieving process. And what I mean by that is that it takes time. When I shifted out of working in corporate America, there was grief for me around the way that I worked. Who I was, so much of my identity for so many years was connected to my title and the role and the work that I did, the teams that I led. Without that identity, I went through a time of grief. I grieved the shifts. And so I want to encourage you to think about your relationship to grief so that you are prepared as you experience different types of grief that we know we will go through in the time up ahead. That's all the time we have for the podcast episode for today. I am glad that you stopped by to listen. Love to know what you think of the episode. Share any thoughts or ideas, reflections that you have, anything that comes up for you in the chat. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and do so. And please share this episode. Think about who would gain, especially from hearing about the trap. How do we keep ourselves out of falling into this trap of seeing ourselves as separate when in truth, we are all bound by the fact that we are human and we are connected through love? I wish you peace and blessings, and I'll see you next week on the podcast. Bye-bye.